Greetings sailors and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 76, which this time round is going to be a Japanese small boats edition. We've got the Kitikaze first up, as captained by Isham Gamer here, and then we're going to follow it up with a Japanese destroyer that you never ever see. It's very unpopular, nobody ever plays it, super rare. And so therefore, obviously, it will be a massive treat getting to see it on screen just because of how comparatively, unknown and unplayed it is. Yes. Okay, let's lay off that joke before I kill it completely. So yeah, we're starting off with the Kitikaze, which is one of the gunboat line and is in a lot of ways the first of the proper gunboats. The entire line is, calling it the gunboat line is a bit of a misnomer really, because for tier 6, 7 and 8 they're not really, in fact is it from tier 5? No, tier 5 they branch from the Minikaze, of course. Or do they? Oh, I've confused myself now. I can't remember offhand. No, there is the other tier 5 now as well, isn't it? Is it the Matsuki? I can't remember. They've monkeyed around with the line so much since I first started playing the game. Yeah, anyway, suffice it to say, this is the first one that starts to feel like a proper Dakka boat. It's got very fast firing, I believe 100mm guns. It's not particularly fast itself though. It's not exactly the best ship for making a quick getaway, and it's also only got one torp launcher, as you can see here, but it does feature the torp reload booster. So as you can see, he's gone in to contest the cap and has, I think, been able to do so with relative confidence because he's got a Des Moines backing him up, as well as Massachusetts, Atago, and some other battleship that's just kind of squidged off the edge of the screen, so I can't quite see what that is. But this is a fairly good situation to be in a destroyer, when you have somebody to actually back up your cap contesting. So he's going to try putting some torps out, triggers the torp reload booster, and oh, that's an enemy Cleveland. Okay, that might be a bit of a problem. They are, I think, just about in radar range, or just coming into radar range, I forget exactly. And again, they keep doing things like, changing radar ranges and things, but I think 10 kilometers is around the danger zone for the Cleveland. And I don't know if the Des Moines has triggered their radar, or if they've just been spotted going forwards and so the Kagero is backing off, but either way, well, if they sail into one of these torpedoes, that would be awfully useful. In fact, it looks like the, maybe if they have the range, will they get the Cleveland? Maybe? Although, no, even if they do have the range, it looks like they're just going to miss anyway. But as it turns out, no, they didn't have the range, so yeah, that was fine. So as the Cleveland's now backing off a bit, this would be a safer time to trigger a smokescreen. I don't know if the Cleveland had already used a radar at the point where Isham was out of range, but generally speaking, if you see a radar ship nearby and you plonk down a smokescreen, it's just an invitation to get radared. So there's that Kagero, who has had a fairly good guess at where Isham is actually. Not quite good enough to cause him problems. But if he'd smoked up, again, if he'd smoked up a bit earlier, he would have given himself a nice big target on his back, as it were, to aim torpedoes at. But as it was, they were clearly already on their way, so that wasn't much of a problem. And now we get to see the Dakka in action against this North Carolina, who is the only thing really spotted right now. So hopefully he can get some fires going. I don't know if he's got like IFHE or what captain skills he might have on this particular ship, but I think with this kind of ship you're almost more relying on just the sheer rate of fire to try and set some fires. Because, 100mm shells, they're not going to have the highest fire chance. It really is just the amount of dagger you're putting out that you're relying on, much like, say, an Atlanta or a Flint. Or heck, even the latest test ship that I've been playing just this morning, the Friesland, which is a Dutch destroyer that's going to go on the Pan-European tree. It's only got 4 guns, but it has quite a hefty rate of fire, and so it's presumably not that fun to be on the opposite end of. I mean, I wouldn't know. I've been the one that's been playing it, obviously, but yeah, there's been a couple of battleships that have been none too pleased to meet me.
Torpedoes to starboard.
So there's yet more Kagero torps, this time a widespread, and those really aren't a particularly big threat. I mean, they look like they were dropped at just about the edge of range to try and catch Isham's smoke, but they were really unsuccessful. Meanwhile, while this has all been going on, the enemy Kitakaze, well, they've just murdered that Benson, and I think they were the one responsible for capping B as well. But just given the hit point difference between them, even though that Kitakaze has got a survivability expert captain and Isham doesn't, or didn't as of playing this battle, this was a little while ago, I think he sent this in. There's still enough of a hit points difference between them to make this a fairly one-sided fight. The only real like danger here is if Isham gets torpedoed, which would be a little bit embarrassing, all things considered. But yeah, clearly this Kitakaze is you know, a good target to go for, and if they're coming this way, then it's also a very useful thing for his team to be able to intercept them. And as it turns out, yes, they are. It might be they were just trying to get a bit of intelligence for their own team, but as it is, they've blundered right into Isham, and this is only ever going to go one way, really. And he even gets the kill despite some assistance from that Moskva. So there's the torps. And that was a nice easy dodge. He turned in, he recognised that the Kitakaze was dropping their torps, so that wasn't too much of a threat, all things considered. And he also managed not to take too much damage, and even got to use some AP shells in the process. So despite each team only having 1 cap each, just based on the fact that they've been steadily murdering the enemy team, yeah, this is starting to quite clearly come down in Isham's team's favour. I don't think they're going to lose this one at this point. I mean, you never know. Sometimes you've got that secure win that then ends up being a little bit less secure than you think it would be, but that is quite the lead they've got, so it's really just what more can Isham do at this point. And, well, one of the things he could do is murder yet another destroyer. The enemy Kagero really has to be cursing their luck at this point. That's just about one of the last ships you want to run into. But that said, look at how much damage those guns are doing, you know? Even the non-gunboat Japanese destroyers do have quite substantial guns. The shells are very, very dangerous. It's just they don't have the rate of fire and they don't have the turret traverse. So even though Isham is going to win this fight, and I think maybe either the Bismarck or the Zhao is now aiming at him, he's lost most of his health in the process. And this is also why survivability expert on a high tier destroyer, just for those few extra 1,000 hit points, is incredibly useful. Dare I say it, almost mandatory, because, you know, on a battleship, a few extra 1,000 hit points as a percentage of your overall total health, it's not much. On a destroyer, it can keep you alive so much longer. It really can make such a difference. So torps out against the Bismarck. He could maybe have used the torp reload booster here. I probably would have myself, just to maybe guarantee a better chance of hitting that Bismarck, but never mind. It also looks like the carrier is trying for a blind drop on his smoke based on where he's firing from. So he's activated his AA, and we'll get to see the AA in action as well, which theoretically on these ships, the Tier 9 and the Tier 10, is not bad. But only theoretically, you know, because AA is a bit in flux at the moment. But as I said, this is an older game, so that doesn't really count that much. It's kind of hard to talk about AA generally at the moment because it is rather in flux. So they've only lost 2 ships overall. They basically won on points. I'm not going to make you watch the end of that. They don't manage to kill the last surviving enemy ships. But yeah, overall, 68,000 damage done, and he had decent XP, but sadly I was unable to get the score screens. It was uploaded to the WoW's Replays site, and theoretically, you know, you can upload your score screens there, but sometimes it for older replays, certainly, it seems not to retain them for long enough to always be able to download them. So I'll just have to take Isham's word for it that it was a very good XP game. In fact, he said it was his highest non-premium ship XP game that he'd ever had up till that point. He may have surpassed it since then, but still, it was a fairly good run-in of the Kitakaze's capabilities. So then we move on to the super unpopular Shimakaze. Nobody ever plays this ship, but it's so rubbish having all of those nasty murder death torpedoes, you know, 15 of them. It's obviously just completely obsolete these days. Yes. Now this one's definitely a perennial favourite. I mean, as a balance has shifted back and forth over the years and various game mechanics have changed, it's arguable that the effectiveness overall of the Shima has altered a bit, but just the power of those torpedoes and how many it gets, you know, can't really be argued. So in this particular, the start of this particular game, we've got a whole bunch of radar ships in play, and they're going to be, I mean, there were radar ships in the last game, but it's going to be rather more pertinent to how this one plays out overall. And as you can see there, Andy's spotted that, yeah, there's some radar ships lurking to the north, so rather than try and get in to where the Fletcher is on that cap, he's going to keep his distance, although he scored a few early hits at the cost of a bit of his own health as well against that enemy Shima. Both teams have 2 Shimas, much to the terror, I'm sure, of every battleship in play. But it does remain to be seen quite how, you know, effective they'll be, depending on how much attention people are playing, and obviously, you know, how willing battleships and other surface vessels are willing to sail in nice straight lines, because that does make a rather tremendous amount of difference when you're playing any torpedo destroyer. So it's coming back round. We can be confident that other Shima has backed off the cap. At least the Fletcher is steadily capping. The other flank doesn't look so good. There's the Shima and what is that, an Ibuki? I can just about make out the minimap. So yeah, that's looking a bit dicey, all things considered. It looks like they won't get A at all. But meanwhile, that Shima that Andy had previously traded shots with rather boldly pushes forwards, presumably to try and drop some torps on that Richelieu. But in doing so, they've gotten themselves well and truly spotted and making themselves a nice easy kill for Andy. That's actually the first kill that anyone on their team has managed, although to be fair, if Andy hadn't managed it, then somebody else would have. There's a fair cluster of ships there. But lo and behold, there's the other enemy Shima. And it's not like these Shimas were in a division or anything, so yeah, they've decided just to smoke up, start firing at the spotted battleships. And so, well, if they don't move, you know, given what I said earlier about smoke screens being a nice big target on your back, if you know that there are people firing torpedoes nearby, well, we'll see if this Shima knows that particular lesson. Now, one thing Andy has done here, and you'll see him do fairly often throughout this game, is basically split up his drop. He very rarely puts all his torps out against a single target, which, for the lower tier Japanese destroyers, when you've got only 2 launchers, can be, you know, it can end up really impeding your effectiveness, but other times it can be very, very useful. With the Shima in particular, because you've got the 3 launchers and because your torps are so powerful, it makes a lot more sense to do it as a matter of habit, because if you're dropping all of your torps on a single target over and over again, well, unless they're a very bad player, they are going to come to expect it to a certain extent. You know, there are always exceptions, people that just seem to not be paying attention whatsoever, at all whatsoever, but for the most part, you know, people do have some sense of pattern recognition. And they will come to recognise that, if they're being dropped on repeatedly, maybe they should start taking evasive manoeuvres. So, splitting up your drops so that you are, maybe you've got a primary target in mind, but also that you're dropping on somebody that isn't necessarily paying attention and trying to throw in evasive manoeuvres, it can quite often guarantee better results than just throwing all your torps out against a single target. So that's exactly what he's doing with his oncoming battleships, and hopefully he will strike lucky. And he's actually put most of his torps out against the Republic because the De Grosse, of course, has got hydro, and especially as he's just caught the edge of that Moskva radar, well, if I were that De Grosse, I would trigger my hydro at that point. But because the battleships haven't gotten a lot of warning, even though the De Grosse starts to turn, it's really too late to totally avoid taking damage. So he takes 1. Unfortunately, the Republic doesn't take any, but as any torpedo dropping destroyer captain will know, this is a really bad angle for dropping torps. Having ships coming towards you is good overall. It gives them less reaction time in terms of getting out of the way, but if they're coming straight towards you with no angling involved whatsoever, at that point there's every chance that you'll end up with a nice big torpedo, not torpedo-sized gap, a battleship-sized gap in your torpedo wall. And that's exactly what happened with that Republique. So really at this point he's just waiting for his reload. They're down to a single cap. They are really down on points. That Moskva remains a threat. He's only got this Republic nearby as an ally. Half the team is dead already. In fact, this is an inverse of the last game, where the enemy team just started to collapse. And this time round it looks like it's Andy's team that's in the process of collapsing really very hard. The enemy team has 3 times the points, more ships, overall much better map control, so it's not looking great right now, is it? It's starting to look like Andy's just going to have to try and get in what damage he can before the inevitable happens. So 2 out on that Friedrich de Grosse, whom if they had used hydro, hopefully it would have run out by now. Or maybe they're just, too focused on this Republic to remember that there's, oh yes, Shimakaze nearby. But either way, the torps have the intended result, and there we go, a devastating strike for Andy and a whole bunch of damage done. So that's not too shabby. And in fact, with that kill and along with some others his team has made, they're starting to draw things back a little bit, but it's still not looking great. I mean, just the cap situation alone is completely unsustainable. So there we go, a bonus hit into that Republic as well. That's quite nice. And as he's managed to trigger a flooding in them, they are now ripe for setting on fire. And in fact, Andy potentially could have popped a smoke himself to try and set a fire at this point, but he opts instead to retain his mobility and just keep moving around to try and get a better angle on this Republic. because if they come this side of the island, in fact, potentially he could just smoke up and launch torps from there, and it would not give the Republic a huge amount of wiggle room. Although, of course, you know, with the speed boost, the French battleships can be quite tricky to nail down with torpedo drops sometimes. You think you've got them banged to rights, and then they go from standing still to, you know, accelerating neatly out of the way in a rather annoyingly short amount of time. So you can't really take anything for granted. So again, 2 out of 3 dropped on the Republic, and will he save his third one as a just in case? Because I think I would under these circumstances. Sometimes it's you know, it's quite handy to have your torpedoes cycling together so that you do have the option of putting everything out at once. But in this case, it looks like he is hanging on to that last drop just on the off chance that these torps don't do the job. But as it happens, they do. And certainly his earlier torpedo hit helped weaken that Republic by enough that, you know, it only took a couple more hits to finish them off. So meanwhile, this Hindenburg's getting awfully close, and considering the efficacy of German hydro, and he's playing a slightly risky game here, but again, I think banking on the Hindenburg being entirely occupied by other things. And in fact, now he does smoke up and put his guns to use to see if he can't help hasten the end of this Hindi, because the Hindi is a dangerous ship at close range when you're in a destroyer, just because of its hydro, and also it's got decent guns. It's all round a pretty nice tier 10 cruiser. But as it happens, no, they don't even react in time to an angry smoke cloud appearing off their side, and there goes another torp hit and another kill, and now we're up to 175,000 damage done. Suddenly, this is looking entirely winnable. They're down to 4 ships, but they've managed to knock down the enemy team to only 2. And in the process, Andy has now gotten himself a Kraken. This is the sort of game that Shimmer drivers really dream of, I think. Just getting to murder all of the things with torpedoes. You know, battleships kind of forgetting that you're there or getting distracted, and ships with hydro that might be a problem, either not having it available or just not thinking to use it. And so, although this could have been a far trickier game potentially, even without the presence of a carrier in play, the radar ships that could have been a threat to him really weren't, and the ships with hydro that could have been a threat to him also really weren't. But of course, Andy's been playing it relatively smart here as well. He's been picking his targets quite carefully. He's been splitting up his torp drops to try and maximise the amount of surprise factor that he can get. And the enemy team has also really helped him out in that it seems like one of those situations where they got a bit greedy, a bit eager, and decided to all pile in because, oh, we're winning, we're really winning, we've got this, and then they all die one by one. So 5 hits into that Republic, but it's not quite enough to kill them, unfortunately. And it's actually some gunfire, some blind gunfire from their own Republic that gets the kill. They must have been very low health after that, vanishingly low health. So now it's just the enemy Fletcher. I think their own Des Moines is out of radar at this point. They are still not quite equal on points, but they are now free to cap. And there is more than enough time left in the match for them to overtake, given how narrow a margin the points are now at. And this Fletcher is in really an unenviable position. They can't know for sure the Des Moines is out of radar. So they, you know, have to be cautious about that. And although the Fletcher's fairly stealthy, the Shima is that bit stealthier, and the other Shima that's left alive has got radiolocation. So they're very low health, they will die if they encounter the Fletcher, but they can provide intelligence to the team. So we spend the next little while with this other Shima captain, basically pinging various bits of the map and saying they're here, now they're here, now they're here. And so everyone's converging basically on this area of the map where we know this Fletcher to be. And this is one of those circumstances where you can argue the radiolocation makes a big difference, and it kind of does as far as that Fletcher's concerned, because apart from anything else, there's a psychological factor of knowing the enemy team always has at least some idea where you are. But practically speaking, I don't think there's much the Fletcher could have done to win from this position. I mean, yes, that other Shima is very low health. The Republic, maybe they could have taken out with torpedoes. I'm not sure what health the Des Moines is on. I think they've taken a battering, but trying to take everyone down, I mean, like, unless this Fletcher's full health, Andy would have a good chance of winning a gunfight all by himself. So yeah, this Fletcher really doesn't have much of a chance, and the fact that they're being radiolocated, and heck, I mean, they even gave away their position by trying to cap briefly before the end. It's not really a winnable position for them, and so without radiolocation in play they might have gotten to live, but as it turns out, with it in play, no, even with the now only being about 40 seconds left on the clock, and there we go, they're very low health, it's only going to take a couple of hits. We're actually going to end this with the entire enemy team taken out. This game looked like it was going to be a very different outcome from up to about the, you know, like first half, and then just the sheer amount of damage Andy managed to inflict on the advancing forces, nearly 250,000, 6 kills, over 3,000 base XP. That was a heck of a game, and all the surviving ships, as you can see, did pretty well, and the team generally did pretty well. There were a couple of people with very lackluster scores, but overall, yeah. I mean, it certainly helped when you had things like that enemy Shima just sitting in the smoke, giving their position away, firing, and battleships turning to, you know, give a nice broadsides with the torpedo drops, and people not using hydro and all that sort of thing. But even so, that was a really good result. And like I said earlier, it's the kind of game that you dream of when you play the Shimikaze. Everybody wants to have that sort of game. But in this case, it was Andy that in fact did have it. So that's it for this Patreon supporter spotlight video. I will do what I do occasionally remember to, which is say that if you feel like throwing $1 or $2 my way every month to help support the channel, which because it is the main way that I pay the bills, you can find the link to my Patreon in the video description. Otherwise, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video if you enjoyed it, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.